Thank you, Connie, and good morning, everyone. And indeed, a big thank you to Mayor Jensen for hosting us in your wonderful city. I couldn't think of a more appropriate place to get together to talk about the future that we want. And also, I'd like to pay tribute to Mayor Hidalgo. It's been such a privilege to serve you for the last 3 years as chair of C40. Thank you for your leadership and your vision, but most of all, thank you for your bravery, your determination to create clean air in Paris and to face down that pollution lobby that has opposed you at every step. I think is both a sign that the tide is turning, but also it's a signal to all of us that if we really want to avert climate breakdown, then we've got to be prepared to fight for it. So, as Connie said, it's actually 10 years since C40 last gathered here in Copenhagen. Then it was at COP15. So that feels like an appropriate time to take a look at how we're doing on delivering against the targets that we've set ourselves. But first, just to put that in some global context, and unfortunately the news that greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Indeed, half of all the human-caused carbon pollution has been put into the atmosphere since 1990. The last time that emissions that were this high, human beings didn't exist. So those incredible young climate leaders who've been out on the streets are right when they say to us that we're in a climate emergency. And you only have to look around C40 cities to see the evidence that 1 degree of global heating is bad enough. 92%, 9 in 10 C40 cities experienced flooding last year. Cape Town narrowly avoided day zero running out of water, but already a quarter of C40 cities are water stressed, and our analysis shows that within the next 5 years, 70% of C40 cities will be water stressed. And I think that is a signal that whatever we do on mitigation, we have to now put resources into adapting our cities to the inevitable consequences of the climate change we've already caused. Otherwise, we'll lose the capacity to cut emissions in the future. And yet, despite all of that backdrop, we see that intergovernmental collaboration on climate change is still being blocked by a small number of very powerful leaders in big polluting countries. And we've all seen on our screens recently the terrible consequences of that in the burning of the Amazon rainforest. But let's move to the good news now. The rest of us are all still in, and we know what to do. And the first step is to be very clear about our targets. So 3 years ago in Mexico City, we started this Deadline 2020 program in C40. The commitment that every city, as a condition of membership of C40, will publish a robust plan for how they will stay within a carbon budget consistent with constraining global average temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. Some of you might remember that ticking clock from 3 years ago. We're not using it this time. It still gives me nightmares. But let's look at how we're doing. Are we on track? Well, good news. 12 of the C40 cities have already published their Deadline 20 compliant action plans, and 63 more have them in progress, which is great news and good progress. But of course, it's not enough. And I very much hope that some of the mayors that have not yet made that commitment will do so while we're here this week. The next big target is that global emissions need to peak by the end of next year and then come steeply down. And the cities that you can see scrolling on the screen here have already peaked their emissions. They've been going down for at least 5 years. Indeed, half of all C40 cities are now on track to peak their emissions by 2020. Again, that's fantastic news, but it's not enough. We need all the large emitting cities in C40 to have peaked their emissions by 2020. And then the really hard work begins, because in the next decade, we need to halve emissions across C40. That's why we've put such focus on the big ticket declarations, the areas where mayors have most powers and can shift global markets. And I'm just going to run through some of those now. The first is zero emission transport. And here, just a fantastic story of progress. 10 years ago, there were only 100 zero-emission buses on the streets of C40 cities. Today, that number is 66,000. Yeah, it deserves a round of applause. And that's a testament to the 34 cities that have signed C40's Green Healthy Streets commitment, along with the incredible leadership of our Chinese cities. These entrepreneurial city governments are now shifting the global market so that it's now cheaper to own an electric bus than a diesel bus over the lifetime of its operation. But again, it's not enough, and we need now to shift the remaining barriers so that all mayors, particularly the financial barriers, are able to invest immediately in electric and zero-emission buses so that all of our buses on our streets can be clean within the next decade. The second part of that Green Healthy Streets commitment is to make a major area or the whole of the city completely free of fossil fuel-powered vehicles by 2030. That's going to mean a significant shift, improving mobility, but without the need to use a car in many cases. At the moment, about half of trips in C40 cities are made by mass transit, cycling and walking, but that needs to rise to an average to 70% across C40 on average by 2030. That's going to deliver huge benefits in addition to reducing emissions, cleaner air and greater equality of mobility, but it's going to need a massive investment. Half of all the emission reductions that we see as possible across C40 cities coming from changing the way that we use energy in buildings. And there are 26 C40 cities now that are regulating so that they will only be permitting zero-emission buildings by 2030. They're also regulating to retrofit their existing buildings, creating thousands of jobs. And indeed, as I was learning talking to the Mayor of Joburg yesterday, bringing electricity for the first time to some informal settlements. But again, it's not enough. And to get every city in C40 to be able to make those same commitments, we need to remove the barriers, increase the power so that mayors can do things like the Mayor of New York has done with his incredible building mandate, changing that New York skyline so those buildings are retrofitted. And indeed, we need to look not just how buildings operate, but how they're constructed, which is why the mayors of Oslo, Copenhagen and Stockholm will be announcing a new C40 initiative on clean construction here this week. Waste really matters not just because of the emissions of methane from landfill or the pollution into the air from incinerating waste, but also because waste clogs up the rivers, it clogs up the drainage, it exacerbates flooding, and it causes the spread of disease. And that's why it's so important that the 25 cities that have signed the C40 Zero Waste Declaration will be, as a result of their actions over the next decade, rather than a business as usual 12% increase in the volume of waste going to landfill and incineration, there'll be a 30% reduction. But again, it's not enough. We need every city to be able to make that commitment. We need all mayors to be working, using their powers of regulation and investment and persuasion to end the single-use culture and move to something closer to a circular economy. So these are the things that we've been really focused on for the last 3 years. There are a couple of new things that we'll be announcing here this week. I can't say much about them, but Mayor Sala of Milan is going to be announcing a new group of cities focusing on achieving a planetary health diet. And thank you to our amazing partners in EAT for working with us on that. And then a large group of mayors is going to be announcing a major new initiative on clean air for all in our C40 cities. So I've talked mostly this morning in terms of reducing carbon emissions. But that huge investment and shift in policy that's going to be necessary to avoid climate breakdown is also a once-in-a-century opportunity to fix an economy that's not only caused climate breakdown, but also results in huge inequalities across the world. And that's why we're also excited in the C40 staff that our incoming chair, Mayor Garcetti, has decided yesterday to launch a global Green New Deal programme in C40 so that going forward, everything that we do will be focused on environmental justice, but also social and economic justice together. I think that's an incredible record of success over the last 10 years. There'll be more of these smiling, happy pictures this week. It shows that there are political leaders in the world who are willing to act on the basis of science, and even more importantly, to collaborate and work together across the world, across geographic boundaries, despite differences of culture and economic development. And that's, along with the incredible leadership of young people, and there's lots of youth leaders from around the world here today, I'm delighted to say, that's what's keeping me optimistic. I think we've made amazing progress, but it's always what we do next that really matters. And it's what you do as the mayors and leaders of the C40 cities over the next 10 years, and what you inspire others to do to follow in your wake that could decide the future of humanity. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you to build the future we want, starting right here in Copenhagen. Thank you very much.